Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today, both on Zoom and by Facebook Live. My name is Ronan McGrath. I'm a professor of physics in this university, and I've been leading a group whose aim has been to define and articulate the contribution of the Faculty of Science and Engineering in the area of civic engagement. This week sees the launch of our report online. A link to this will be shared in the final slide and also circulated to you after this event. The report covers 6 areas of activity of our faculty, and these areas are innovation, health technologies, climate and sustainability, public policy, public engagement, and employability. We believe the report demonstrates the contribution we are making in each of these areas, so please do have a look at the report when you get a chance. For this launch event, we've chosen a subset of these topics to address, and we have 4 speakers who will describe our contribution in their own area of expertise. And of course, with the added focus of how the faculty can help the city and the region recover from the current COVID pandemic. Our speakers today are Rochelle Dessart from our School of Engineering, Alex Singleton from the School of Environmental Sciences, Matt Reed from our Materials Innovation Factory, and Ewan Williams from our Careers and Employability team. A couple of housekeeping points before we start. The session will be recorded and will be available on the university website after this event. And secondly, and most importantly, I would like to invite you to submit any questions that you have during the panelists' presentations and throughout the session. And this can be done using the question and answer facility on Zoom or using comments on Facebook. Before we go any further, I would like to invite our faculty academic lead, our executive pro-vice chancellor, Wiebe van der Hoek, to say his own few words of welcome. So over to you, Wiebe.
Thank you, Ronan. It is my great pleasure as executive pro-vice chancellor of the Faculty of Science and Engineering to say a few words of the introduction of this event. Our faculty spans the breadth of science and engineering disciplines. We consider civic engagement as an integral part of our mission. We host some of the university's prime innovation facilities on our campus, and we are committed to using our expertise and facilities not only to produce world-class research, but also to have a real impact on our local region. We want to make a difference to people's lives. Today, we are launching the web version of our new report entitled Science and Engineering, Our Civic Dimension, which I have commissioned. We want people to be aware of what we can offer as a faculty, particularly in terms of post-COVID recovery of this great city and the surrounding region. And we look forward to establishing new partnerships and joint projects for the benefit of the city and its people. I'd like to thank Ronan McGrath, who chaired the working group producing this report. And I also would like to thank for their valuable contributions, Liz Sheffield, Vicky O'Kelly, Rachel Dessart, Andy Plater, Rahul Savani, and Alex Singleton. Back to you, Ronan.
Thank you, Wiebe, that's great. I'll now introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Rochelle Dessart. Rochelle is a senior lecturer in the School of Engineering. She leads the antimicrobial biomaterials group there. And her research focuses on the fabrication of antimicrobial nanomaterial platforms for infection control. Her group works on nitric oxide antimicrobial therapeutics to treat drug-resistant infections in the skin, eye, and bone. Her research also involves the development of antimicrobial nanomaterials for clean drinking and industrial water applications. Recently, she's joined the fight against COVID by pivoting her research work from antibacterial technologies to developing antiviral coatings for PPE. So over to you, Rochelle.
Thanks, Ronan, for that introduction. So today I'm just going to give you a quick introduction into some of the work and research that goes on in the faculty in terms of healthcare technologies and how we're making an impact regionally, nationally, and indeed internationally. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the COVID pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic marks one of the world's greatest global challenges experienced this century. It has led to more than 56 million reported infections and has caused more than 1.3 million deaths worldwide. And in March, we saw a worldwide shortage of PPE, which was essential to prevent frontline workers from developing the disease by coming into contact with infected patients. The shortage of PPE was so dire, in fact, that there were even reports of NHS staff being asked to reuse some of this equipment, and this was at the height of the pandemic. The University of Liverpool really spurred into action to respond to this crisis on a local level. During the first lockdown, staff and PhD students in engineering and architecture answered this call by producing protective face visors using the latest in 3D printing and laser cutting technologies. The protective visors were developed in conjunction with the NHS staff at the Royal Liverpool Hospital, Broad Green, Aintree, Southport and Ormskirk hospitals as well. And the final design incorporated bits of 3D printing and laser cutting technologies as well. Laser cutting reduced the production rate from about 6 hours to about half an hour. We worked with industrial partners to help the scale up and process. Unilever is one of the University of Liverpool's key strategic partners, and during this time they provided support in terms of the scale up of the production of these visors. AMB and Smurfit Kappa are leading in terms of packaging materials, and they too donated materials that to the production of these visors. These visors were then used in 3 hospitals in the northwest of England. So if we put COVID aside for a moment and talk about how researchers in the faculty are addressing different healthcare technologies, we really see that we have quite a few key strengths within the faculty, and we work in conjunction with a lot of local industries to be able to deliver new technologies for healthcare. For example, we are at the forefront of the early diagnosis and treatment of cancers. We investigate rapid real-time chemical and biological disease detection methods that should allow clinicians to be able to make really important decisions that affect long-term outcomes of diseases such as cancer. One really key example which has a regional effect is that head and neck cancers in Merseyside and Cheshire are significantly above the national average, and these type of cancers have increased by about 40% over the last decade. Within the faculty, we work with the university's Northwest Cancer Centre and have a PhD project in this area. We also lead the new STFC Cancer Diagnosis Network, and this multidisciplinary network includes academics, clinicians, industrialists, and they all work together to address clinical challenges in the diagnosis of cancer in a collaborative way. The University of Liverpool, specifically in terms of the physics department, has a long-standing relationship with the Wirral-based Clatterbridge Centre, which is one of the UK's leading cancer centre on proton therapy, and they provide highly specialised cancer care to a population of about 2.3 million people across Cheshire, Merseyside and the Isle of Man. With the physics department, investigators constantly try to keep this the technology at Clatterbridge at the cutting edge. The School of Engineering and St. Paul's Eye Unit are currently trying to tackle glaucoma management, and the Liverpool Biomechanical Engineering Group works with the Royal in undertaking a clinical study on trying to develop a device that will constantly measure eye pressure, and this will help with glaucoma management. Currently, there's no device available that does this commercially, and this device was developed in conjunction with patient feedback from local patient groups and healthcare providers. And this feedback really helped to improve the design features of this contact lens device. Researchers within the faculty are also trying to improve cardiovascular health, funded by the British Heart Foundation. They work with volunteers, they do community activism, and they also engage with regional politicians and media. We also work with the Healthy Aging Network. We have a Healthy Aging Network in Liverpool, and with this network, we are trying to develop ways of repairing bones, teeth, cartilage, and other prosthetic devices with local industry. And the last bit of research, the bit of strength that I will talk about is in terms of infection research. University of Liverpool really is a leader in terms of infection research, and there are several different researchers across the faculty that work in trying to develop new ways of treating infections. The World Health Organization has stated that without significant action, drug-resistant infections could cause about 10 million deaths per year by 2050 and another global financial crisis. And this is really a much more deadly pandemic that is slower moving. And we have a significant strength in Liverpool that is trying to tackle this slowly moving pandemic. Within chemistry specifically, there is an open innovation antimicrobial services hub that links with multinationals and regional and national SMEs to try to tackle the problems. Liverpool is also part of a £19 million Strengthen Places Consortium, which intends to create specialist commercially sustainable research platforms for infectious disease. And as Ronan had said, bringing this back to COVID, my own research has pivoted actually back into trying to develop antiviral visors for being able to prevent healthcare workers from developing COVID, because what happens when someone who is COVID positive sneezes, they release droplets that can then be inhaled or come into contact with PPE or surfaces that have COVID and develop the infection, and these antiviral visors should help stop the transmission of COVID. And that is actually just a really quick whirlwind tour of how we engage with local industry and local hospitals to improve healthcare technologies within the faculty. Thank you. So sorry, I'm going to actually introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Matt Reid. Matt Reid is a strategy director for the Materials Innovation Factory at the University of Liverpool. He joined the university in 2019, but has worked since 2013 to co-create the Materials Innovation Factory in partnership with leading academics at the University of Liverpool, Unilever R&D, and the UK government. In his current role, Matt works to create, maintain, and exploit strategic innovation partnerships between Liverpool and other leading edge academic institutes, government funding bodies, and commercial innovators. Matt is a scientist, innovator, and inventor. He has a technical background in chemistry, quantitative microscopy, and data science, and he also holds an MBA in technology management. He's got over a 30-year career in science and innovation, and I will leave Matt to take over from me from now.
Great, thank you. So I work at the Materials Innovation Factory at the University of Liverpool. With this is an incredible, really futuristic lab that's located on the University Science campus, close to Abercrombie Square. The building was formally opened in 2018 by one of the UK's leading scientists, Venki Ramakrishnan. But a big team of people, including myself, have been working on the project for 5 years before that. The Materials Innovation Factory is, I think, a unique translational research facility. And what this means is that it tries to bridge the gap between its world-class knowledge in fundamental science and what businesses need to do to drive their own innovation activities. So the facility was built on a long-term strategic partnership between the university, Unilever and the UK government. And that partnership was based on the shared ambition to transform how chemistry, research and innovation was done. And really the main approach to doing that is to develop and apply a range of digital methods, such as artificial intelligence, lab robotics and automation to chemistry. So to date, the total investment in the Materials Innovation Factory has been in excess of £100 million. There's more than 100 industry researchers and 200 academic researchers sharing the state-of-the-art facility. The building itself was more than £60 million to build, and it's 12,000 square meters in size. So it's a really large building with 4 floors. One of the ambitions we had when we created the Material Innovation Factory was to create a really open and dynamic innovation ecosystem around that building, around the activity. And for that reason, we've followed an open by design approach. And that openness is reflected in the architecture, in the operating model, and the fact that we have low barriers to engagement and use of our facilities. So we have £20 million worth of state-of-the-art equipment, which is available to any company or any academic and on an open access basis. So in other words, you pay as you go. And that equipment isn't just on its own. We have an in-house support team of nearly 20 experts to help you get the most out of the equipment. Our aim is to continue to be the home of world-leading science, but also to help to make a difference across Liverpool City Region and the wider UK economy. And since the COVID lockdown, I've been focusing on 3 things from the Material Innovation Factory: their partnership, place and people. So in terms of partnership, the Material Innovation Factory was built through a partnership, and that remains one of our distinctive strengths. So I spend a lot of my time actively trying to develop innovation partnerships with local government, with local and national funding agencies, with local companies, and also some of the UK's largest research intensive firms such as Croda, NSG Pilkington, Johnson Matthey, AstraZeneca and Unilever. And my aim in those partnerships is to create new value for those partners by helping them to make the most of what we've developed, but also to establish Liverpool as the UK's leading location for the use of digital techniques in materials chemistry. So these partnerships lead to projects in Liverpool, and those projects support existing jobs and they help to create new jobs. And the new digital platforms that we're building are developed and hosted here in Liverpool. So as companies across the UK and more widely across Europe and the world begin to pay to use our digital tools for their innovations, that money flows back to Liverpool and to the Liverpool economy. In terms of place, our aim is to exploit what is really unique about what we do at Liverpool. For example, the university team led by Professor Andy Cooper has this year created a world-leading technology in the form of a mobile robotic researcher, which can run experiments in a chemistry lab with minimal human intervention for weeks at a time. We developed this idea before COVID, but now we can see that this is an intrinsically socially distanced way to do lab work. It's a new solution to the new COVID created problem. It allows companies that use laboratories to keep working and to keep innovating. For that reason, we've had unprecedented global interest in this technology. We've already created a Liverpool-based spin-out company called Robotics to make the most of the opportunity and to create new, highly skilled jobs in Liverpool. In partnership with the local government leaders of the Liverpool City Region, we've also made a proposal to the UK central government to fund a Liverpool-based business and technology incubator to really accelerate this opportunity for the whole of the UK. Our technology and our approach is currently unique to Liverpool, and we want to keep it that way. We want the world to come to us to benefit from this, not to go elsewhere. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I think, is our people. So these innovation partnerships and the unique technology we've created in Liverpool only become really important for Liverpool's economy when they translate into highly skilled and highly paid jobs in local businesses. We need to create new companies based on the special science that goes on at the Materials Innovation Factory. And we also need existing companies to make the most of what is on their doorstep. We need companies outside Liverpool to pay for projects here, and we need the short-term research projects we run at the university to lead to much longer-term jobs for the talented people we know we can attract. Our ambition is to find ways to retain more of our Liverpool talent and also attract talented people from across the UK and across the world to our region who we can then keep here. so that they become part of a more economically vibrant and robust city region. So on that topic of people, I'd want to hand over to our next panelist, who's Ewan Williams, who's the Employability Business Partner for the Faculty of Science and Engineering. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That's great. Firstly, I'd just like to say how proud I am really to be part of a community that is contributing in such magnificent ways to the work, especially post-COVID. It's one of the things I'm most amazed by, is being part of this sort of HE sector and seeing everything that's going on. It's really inspiring. To start with, introduce myself really. My name's Ewan Williams. I'm the Employability Business Partner for the faculty. And putting it as simply as I can, what's my role within this? Well, I see my role as being a way of trying to connect students, university colleagues, academics, and also employers to ensure that there is a steady conveyor belt of graduate talent feeding particularly into our local market. I feel this is an absolutely essential part, and as simple really as I can put my job. Before I think about and talk about a couple of examples of how we're trying to do that in this current situation, in this current world, there were just two sort of contextual factors I just wanted to mention. The first one was really, you might have heard in the media that the graduate labour market's actually taken a bit of a battering recently, that it's very difficult to find a job, there's no jobs out there, people aren't hiring. And without disappearing down various rabbit holes around different sectors and different opportunities, I would say that largely that message, although yes, there has been an impact, there are still plenty of opportunities out there. And in fact, what we're seeing is a growth of new kinds of opportunities where particular sectors related to science and engineering are resistant and responding really positively. So that picture is much more positive than I think it's sometimes presented. The next contextual factor really is thinking about the future of work, because I can't do my job, we can't prepare our students unless we think about what's to come. And of course, what's really difficult to know for sure, the one thing I think we can look at is probably there's going to be more remote working, there's going to be greater reliance on digital technologies to enhance collaboration. And I also think that the way we look at recruitment is going to change. And that might be the processes, you know, interviews over Skype and things like that happened already. But I think we're going to see much more digital tech involved in recruitment. But I also think that we're going to look at who we recruit in a different way as well. Do you need to live within commutable distance of any job anymore? So whilst there are some threats that are part within those kind of new factors, there's also plenty of opportunities for us to try and maximize. I think it will often come down to skills. And when I think about the new world that we're moving into, I think about three different sort of sets of skills and characteristics that I think are going to be really essential. Firstly, that ability to collaborate and communicate. We see already now when you've got a Zoom or a Skype or a Teams meeting, that ability to get your message across effectively is even more difficult over digital tech than it is face-to-face. So we need our students to be experts in this area. We also need to look at a characteristic of agility, flexibility, adaptability. And I would add into that the idea of creativity and being an innovator. We see no one could really have predicted what was going to happen 12 months ago, but the people that have been able to pivot very quickly and change the way they're working and change their business are the ones that have done best out of this area. So we need to equip our students with that ability to be agile to any situation. And finally, really, it's a cliche, I suppose, in employability, but that idea of a characteristic of being self-motivated, passionate, positive mindset, resilient, confident, those kind of characteristics grouped together are so important now, because what we need is not just problems, we need solutions. We need people that are going to continue to work, continue to go, not let anything get them down. And if we can create graduates that have those three things together, we are going to be great and in a fantastic position, regardless of what the world looks like in the next 6-12 months. So how do we try and do that within the faculty? Well, I've got 3 members of my delivery team that are actually leading on 3 different sets of activity at the minute. I thought it'd be really nice to showcase 3 different examples being led by my team at the moment. The first one is a final year maths module. So working in collaboration with the department, with our employability lead there, and a large local company, the Very Group, who I'm sure you'll know as an online retailer, we have a final year module that groups of students work with real life customer data from the website. And what they'll do is they'll spend 3 weeks looking through that data, identifying patterns, and then present back their findings of how Very Group can utilize this data differently, keep people on their website longer, spend more money, I suppose, at the end of the day. How they can do that, they feed that back directly to the employer, which is a fantastic experience. They're collaborating, they're communicating, they're being innovative in what they're doing. And at the end of it, they've got something fantastic to relate on their CV. It's a really brilliant experience. The second thing is anyone that's watched the video will have seen an intern, a current student of ours, Ellie, talking about the Sustainability in Action project. which is an online module that was developed over the summer. The faculty paid for 6 interns to work together, and they were given a fairly simple task in theory, but it was actually really, really difficult, was to create a module that would take around 7 hours for our students to complete when they return back to uni, new starters as well as those returning students, that would inform and encourage participation in this idea of sustainability. So the students did an amazing job. I said to them, this cannot feel like an academic experience, and it's fun, engaging, interactive. There's lots and lots of opportunities to interact with each other and the local region itself. So at the end of it, our students that complete that, and there's over 500 so far and still counting, have something that they can demonstrate on their CV. It's a fantastic experience to put on. They've researched, they've collaborated. And what's more than that, the final part of this module is all around the impact locally around sustainability. So if they want to get involved in more things, they know where to go. They know which groups to join. They know where societies exist to make a real difference. And there's lots of tips for them to work towards. So it's making a real impact for the local environment and the local region, but it's also enhancing the employability as well. The final thing I really wanted to mention was, if I refer back to those skills that I was mentioning before, collaboration, communication, problem solving, if it was possible for me to package them in one way, it would be through enterprise. Now, this idea of enterprising behaviors is something I'm very passionate about. So we often relate entrepreneurship to enterprise. And I completely love the idea of students going out, setting up their own business, developing their own ventures. That is going to be something that we'll see more of, but it's not for everyone. But if we look at the behaviors that create those entrepreneurs, they're what I consider to be enterprising behaviors. So we have an enterprise lead that works within the faculty and is at the moment creating a week long of activities that relate all around enterprise in 3 of the 4 schools, and the 4 schools will be next, I think, as well. And these activities involve skill sessions, employers coming in, returning in and speaking to students. We have employer panels. We have returning graduates and alumni coming back in. And the engagement of the employers within these events is very, very strongly from the local city region. Liverpool Science Park, Daresbury, SciTech. There's a long list of them that I won't run through, but there's lots and lots of those out there. So these students are given the opportunity on top of their studies to engage with different kinds of opportunity. They'll create networks, they'll create connections with other students, but also with these employers. And what we're trying to do is give these students multiple opportunities to engage in their own employability, develop the skills and experience that they need to enhance and practice those skills. And then when the time's right, with it being a graduate job, internship, or other kinds of experience, they can feel as confident as they need to go out there. We know that lots of the students in the university stay in the local region, so the better we prepare these guys to tackle the challenges of the future, the stronger position we'll all be in. And at that point, I'd like to hand over the reins. I'd like to introduce Alex Singleton, who is a professor of Geographic Information Science, and he's going to talk about public policy and thought leadership in a post-COVID world.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen because I've got a couple of slides to go through while I'm talking. Hopefully you can all see those now. So the topic I was given to talk about, sort of my area of interest, is around sort of public policy and thought leadership. In a general sense, from a science and engineering perspective, really what we're talking about here is the idea that if we have turning sort of data into information or data into insight, and the idea that we can produce better evidence through improving that process. The necessity for doing that, of course, is that the world is increasingly complex, and COVID sort of made that clear. And both in terms of how the world is sort of structured, and how places look, and how the function of places and how people behave and how that leads to their structure, those dynamics are very, very complicated. And in science and engineering, this process of turning data into information and turning data into insight is our sort of key contribution to public policy. And I'll just go into a few examples of that in a second as we'll progress through the talk. So the potential for better evidence, so evidence-based policy, I would argue that it comes from a series of different changes which are more general. The first is that there's a lot of new types of data that are available. So these are often called new forms of data. Some of them are big data, so very, very large data sets, but not always the case. And as an example, and something we use a lot of within the University of Liverpool are things like consumer data. So that might be the type of data that's generated through store cards, your transactions on swipe card transit, for example, in buses or tubes. And then other types of ambient data collection, so the types of sensors that might pick up your footfall as you're sort of walking down a high street, or maybe monitoring things like air pollution, which is sort of generated through cars and non-active travel. These new data assets essentially provide opportunities to look at cities in new ways. And much of the way in which we can do that are through new analytical frameworks, much of which have been developed by the science and engineering sector, particularly around machine learning and artificial intelligence. And those new methods can be applied to those data in different ways, both to describe how places look, but also to build quite sophisticated new models that can predict the outcomes of potential policy interventions. So really what I'm talking about through the sort of linkage of these new methods and new data is a way in which we can produce new evidence. And what I mean by new evidence and new and better evidence is that we can tell policymakers about things that they wouldn't necessarily know otherwise. So if you were just using traditional data, say a census or a survey, or we can potentially enhance existing understanding of existing patterns. So what that might mean is that we can say something about, perhaps using traditional data, we could say something about Liverpool as an area, but using these new forms of data, we could drill right down into local communities and say how they're differentiated. Or maybe we can say in relation to a census, which comes out every 10 years, maybe we can say, you know, something about what the population looks like within that area or their activities at this particular point in time. And obviously, in the context of COVID, these types of data have been very, very important because we couldn't wait for a survey to be delivered, and the census is almost 10 years old. So a lot of the analysis that you've seen presented on television has come from these new forms of data using some of these new methods. Just as a couple of examples which are cited in our report of things that have been going on at the University of Liverpool. The top picture you can see here is Katie Atkinson. So she has interests in using data within the legal sector, and particularly the application of new artificial intelligence methods that can sort of use it to streamline legal processes and insight. And on the back of this work, she's been invited by the Ministry of Justice onto a committee which essentially is advising them on the use of AI within that setting. The map, which is fairly abstract at the bottom, relates to some work that we did with the Greater London Authority to produce a geodemographic indicator which describes the characteristics and context of neighbourhoods within London. And this actually was successful and fed into tools that Transport for London use, and now is actually directly integrated into those tools that are used for planning cycling infrastructure, both pre-COVID and post-COVID, and their evaluation in terms of their success. Now, I've talked mostly about data and methods, and you know, as scientists, that tends to be what we're really interested in. You know, that's what we got our PhDs in and so on. But actually, beyond those type of digital infrastructure, what we recognise within the faculty as being really, really important, and Matt touched on this in terms of his work, is this idea of partnership. And you can't do policy, and you can't do better, create better sort of data-led evidence without actually having the policymaker engagement. So one thing that we are quite actively engaged with in my group, which sits within something called the Geographic Data Science Lab, is this area called urban analytics. And this is really a general process of connecting data through new methods as applied to urban policies. Now, the British Consulate picked up on this area of activity at the university a year or so ago, and introduced us to something called the Metro Labs Network, who at the time were a set of partnerships existing only within the United States between universities and civic organisations, typically the equivalent of local authorities or city regions within the UK. As part of that engagement, they were rolling out this program to the UK, and now Liverpool and Liverpool City Region, Liverpool University and Liverpool City Region are partnered together within the MetroLab network. We have a memorandum of understanding and an ongoing program of research, which we're conducting in collaboration with the Heseltine Institute for Public Policy. And it's a really good platform for the types of things that you can do when you're taking these new data, new methods, people who can do things with them within sort of civic contexts and real world applications. The second area I wanted to highlight, which has been running for around sort of seven or 8 years at the University of Liverpool, again in a national context, is something called the Consumer Data Research Centre. So this sits at the interface between organisations who hold data. You mentioned retailers. We've got lots of retailers within our network, and people who want to access those data to do interesting projects like the students that you mentioned. So we have these conversations with retailers. We've got infrastructure where we can manage these data safely, and we provide a national service where any academic can apply, and we connect retailers with potential research applications, which all sit within the general area of the public good. So, you know, in terms of COVID, this has been very, very helpful. So, for example, some of the data that we collect are around bike share schemes in the UK. So we've got the world's largest database of bike share schemes, usage in the UK and also internationally. The government were interested in that, and they fed into the JBC, into some of their mobility metrics that they used in terms of, COVID monitoring. We've also got the UK's largest network of retail centre footfall sensors. So again, in terms of mobility change and monitoring, we've been using that in terms of retail policy, real-time policy evaluation. For example, we, most recently have looked at the impact of the 10 o'clock closing on sort of pub closures. And you can see that there isn't a general trend across the UK, and in different places, people are responding in different ways. And this is very, very important if you're in terms of sort of localizing these sort of measures of lockdown and so on, and how people are likely to respond within those contexts. Furthermore, more recently again, we've got 2 people now seconded into a new initiative with the ONS and JBC, specifically looking at the response to COVID within local authority context. So again, this network, where we can use some of these new forms of data with new analytical methods, will hopefully spin out some interesting applications that will benefit sort of wider sort of public. So I suppose the takeaways from what I was saying, and I don't think these necessarily deviate too far from what the other speakers have said. Essentially, new data and methods are enabling new insights, but such sort of data-led policy is only effective if the partnerships are established. And at the university, we've got lots of very deep established networks of partners and infrastructure to manage these projects. And we've got the experience as well that we've delivered some real world impact off the back of these. And I think probably the final point I'd like to make is that we're always open to new collaborations or challenges being presented to the university. Thank you. Ronan, I think you're on next.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to all our panelists for their contributions. We've heard about what we're doing in areas of health technology, innovation, employability, and public policy. So we've covered quite a lot of ground. I would now like to open the question and answer session. I remind you again that you can submit questions via the question and answer facility in Zoom, and also via Facebook comments. I will read the questions and invite relevant panelists in turn to respond as appropriate. We'll try and get through as many questions as possible, but we can't guarantee that all the questions will be answered, responded to during the event. We'll do our best in that sense. Okay, so first question comes from Ian Robinson. Do you foresee antimicrobial resistance building in relation to surfaces as it has to drugs? So I think this one is for you, Rochelle.
Yeah, so one of, I guess, the downsides in terms of what has happened in terms of COVID is that we're disinfecting things a lot more. And with disinfecting surfaces and disinfecting, everything that we come into contact with, we're exposing bacteria to antimicrobial agents that they can perhaps become resistant to. And the more we use it, which we have to at this time, the more bacteria will find ways of evolving. But not only surfaces, but drugs as well, because what happens when you get a COVID infection, you're in the hospital, a lot of people develop secondary infections. And with these secondary infections, you're being prescribed a lot of antibiotic drugs. And so the pipeline of antibiotic drugs has sort of, become depleted over the last sort of 30 to 40 years, and there's no new antibiotics available. So we've actually shortened the timeline, which the World Health Organization has said that we will go into a post-antibiotic era. So there's two things that will speed up the sort of slow-moving pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, and that is disinfection of surfaces, as well as the significant increase of drugs that are used in clinic and hospitals.
Thanks very much, Rochelle. I hope that answered the question. Next it's actually a comment from Andrea McEakin. Thanks for letting me be part of this discussion. I am so proud of Liverpool University. Thanks very much for that. We are as well. So glad you could join us this afternoon, I should say. Next, we have a question. Why is civic engagement work so important for universities? I think I'll ask Wiebe to answer this one, as Wiebe commissioned our project on civic engagement. So Wiebe, perhaps you can come in here.
Well, that's a very good question. Thanks for that. First of all, we are the University of Liverpool, and I think we've forgotten about the last term in our title until recently a little bit. We are just part of a community. And we are not only have a duty, we are hungry to show that our work is relevant nationally, internationally, but also regionally. For our research, this is important. We want to show that our work is impactful. And we have great partners to work with in Liverpool. The biggest child hospital in Europe is in Liverpool. And they have demands for health technology and for digital approaches to the analysis of the data. Unilever, a world player, but also just around the corner for us. So there is great opportunities for impact of our research, but also for our students and our teaching. Ewan mentioned employability. What greater experience we can offer our students than experience at the work floor. Again, we have students that have done and they're doing projects in Alderhay Hospital, for instance. We have PhD students that do projects at IBM in Daresbury. So it makes our students more employable, and it gives them a real life experience. Also, these students, especially PhD students, come back with interesting problems for our academics. And so it leads to interesting research questions. Matt and Alex also talked about partnerships. We want to have partnerships internationally in our academic world, but also partnerships nearby, so that we get a constant dialogue with what are the real world problems that are important for us to contribute solutions to.
Okay, Wiebe, thanks very much for that. Next question was, what are plans for engagement with schools? I think I'll take this one myself. It's an area I've been involved with. I think the answer is that we are already engaging with schools and have been for many years. Our academics go to schools and give presentations on their disciplines. They're passionate about the work that they do, and they're passionate about raising aspirations of children to experience a university education, but more than that, to understand and be engaged and be enthused by science and engineering. Our outreach work reaches many thousands of school students every year, generally in the Liverpool City region and beyond. Not only do our academics get involved, but our undergraduates are also get involved. Those who are interested get involved and go out to schools to talk to schools children. And in fact, it's one of the areas of activity that everyone finds hugely enjoyable. She's also mentioned that recently we have started a University of Liverpool sponsored mathematics school just next to our campus, and this is a specialist sixth form college for students who want to specialize in the study of mathematics. It's one of only 3 such schools in the country, and has just started its program this year. So schools activity is a really important part of our public engagement. So thanks for that question. The next one is the university looking into big data applications in primary care. I'll pass this one over to Alex if I can. Can you take this one, Alex?
Yeah. I mean, I think the answer to that is yes. It isn't my particular area, so I don't want to comment on it in depth. But we've got a whole range of people working, broadly speaking, in terms of sort of health data science, and a very large group of people who are actively involved in sort of COVID response as well. If you take the sort of broader definition of primary care. So just as an example, over the weekend, we've been generating accessibility maps for the new rapid testing centres within Liverpool to look at where there might be gaps for future provision to kind of maximise participation in those schemes. So more generally, yes, there's lots of people working in that area, and certainly we can put you in touch if there's any interest.
Great, thanks, Alex. Next, we actually have a couple of questions on the Prime Minister's announcement today of a green industrial revolution. Apparently, he has pledged £4 billion of public money to this agenda. It's aimed at tackling climate change while generating jobs and investment in new technologies. And the question is, what particular strengths do Liverpool and the wider city region have that can contribute to this important policy agenda? Well, in part answer to that, some of the answers are in our report, on our civic engagement report, which was published this week, which you can access on our website. But perhaps I can turn to Matt Reed and say something maybe about green chemistry and the work that's going on in the Materials Innovation Factory around this topic.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that Liverpool's very strong at that I wanted to talk about that's relevant for the green industrial revolution. The first is an activity that I've been involved in over the last 3 or 4 years on really innovating in packaging, so consumer packaging, and changing, moving away from using virgin plastics in packaging to recycled packaging, and both the university and Unilever have led activity there and are continuing to collaborate around that. And I think that's something that actually the city region and also the university is very strong at, and I'm working on a number of projects around that. Secondly is in the broader area of driving to net zero materials, and the university's chemistry department and leading academics like Professor Matt Rosinski and Andy Cooper, Steve Ranard, and the rest of the chemistry department are extremely strong in the novel chemistry you require to do that. And I think that it's not so obvious from outside the chemistry industry, but in order to move to net zero in chemical products and in plastics and in polymers, there really has to be a revolution in the way that chemistry is done. So it's not just small tweaks and small innovations, it needs fundamentally new science. And the University of Liverpool is in fact very well placed and is leading the development of that new chemical science that will lead through to new innovations and new jobs a new economic impact both for Liverpool and for the UK. So I think the university it has got quite a lot of broad activity across that, but there are some particular areas around chemistry and materials innovation factory where it's leading on that, I would say.
Thanks very much, Matt. Next question, how has student learning changed during the pandemic? And you mentioned hands-on learning with local businesses. Is this still the case? Well, I can start an answer to that one. Student learning and in fact our teaching has changed radically during the pandemic. Much of our activity has gone online, as you're probably aware. In fact, in the previous 2 hours to this session, I was teaching 2 online workshops on Zoom, on Microsoft Teams, where students join remotely. But in terms of other experiences and interactions with business, I'll pass that on to Ewan and say something about how that occurs in a pandemic situation.
Thanks, Ronan. Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's absolutely integral that our students are given the chance to interact with employers, and it's clearly it goes both ways, the benefits of that, employers working with our students. So a couple of examples I've mentioned before, the work with Very Group within a maths module. A lot of what we try to do now is to embed employability within the curriculum where we can. So that way it creates this idea of an employability ecosystem in its own right, where students don't have to walk into a building or log into something to access employability, but it's wherever they go. They're understanding why what they're learning in their lectures and in their modules is enhancing their employability. But we also put on lots of other things as well to try and do that. So at the moment we are running what we're calling the Skills Enhancement Project, where we have 14 primarily local small SME, so small medium enterprise businesses have suggested small projects that we have student groups working on at the minute. So they're in week 3 of week 6 of this. And this is actually a extracurricular voluntary experience. We're asking students to spend about 5 hours, and these are final year students as well, to spend about 5 hours a week on this project, where they're working with all sorts of little charitable organizations, but we have other organizations, Enterprise Rent-A-Car as well, that are quite big as well. So we're providing students with lots of opportunity to get into contact with that. What we're also looking to do is across multiple different departments within the faculty, we try to bring an employer and a real life scenario or situation or data, or however it looks, into an assessed criteria. So students have to engage with that content, with that problem in a much more authentic way. Because that means that the students then understand, they start to make those connections between what they're learning and how they actually apply those skills in a real life setting. So for example, we do that in the maths, because that was something we found a lot of mathematicians struggled with, maths students particularly struggled with, was how to apply their skills and see how they would do that. So we address that directly. So we do it an awful lot. There's examples of it right across the faculty. The enterprise experience that I mentioned before has lots and lots of employers within there. So we bring those 2 parties together in as many different ways as we can and as often as we can.
Thanks very much, Ewan. We have a question from Melanie Sinclair. Thanks, Melanie. Are strong partnerships developing between the researchers, modelers at Liverpool University and policy influences in our public administration? I think this is one for you, Alex.
I mean, the answer to that is, I think they're developing and developed. So, across a lot of different contexts, we're working directly with policymakers in sort of national, regional and local governments. And, that is, as I was saying in my talk, I think that's, fundamental to the kind of data-led policy, essentially, is if we, don't start off with problems that matter to people and are giving them the information that they need in a timely fashion, and then that won't be as effective as if we sort of took a kind of ivory tower view. So yes, is the answer, and lots of it's happening already.
Thanks a lot for that. I think I could also mention that the university's outward-facing public policy unit, the Heseltine Institute, we're working very closely with the Heseltine Institute in the Faculty of Science and Engineering, in fact, and that's a key partnership for us. We have a question here. Okay, so it's another question on teaching. distant learning processes of the Open University of use to the University of Liverpool, and what use of remote learning will we do post-COVID? I think that's a brilliant question. Thanks, Rob, for that. I can make a start of that. Teaching and learning probably will look a bit different after post-COVID. We have found, for example, that some elements of our teaching are appreciated by the students. So particularly, for example, pre-recorded lectures where the students can rewind, if you like, to cover any points of difficulty. They really do appreciate that opportunity to do that. I'm sure there'll be other areas of our teaching and learning which will change, but I think the other thing is that we will not be going away from face-to-face teaching. It's a key part of what we do. It's a key part of the student experience as well. Question from Sarah: if each of the panel members could toast one significant civic achievement in the next 2 to 3 years, what would it be? Okay, that's a great question. I'm not sure we'll have time for everyone to respond, but maybe we could come back to Rochelle in the first instance. Rochelle, if there was an area in your area, is there an achievement in your area, what would that might be?
I think the achievement really in healthcare technologies that the University of Liverpool should be really proud of is how it has really responded to the COVID pandemic. As you know, I stated in my talk, we have a significant strength in terms of infection control research, and within the faculty, you know, there has been students and staff that really got together and you know, developed visors to help NHS staff, you know, without, you know, consequence to, you know, thinking about themselves or anything. It was a completely altruistic goal that they had in mind. And, you know, from the broader university, lots of researchers are working on developing new therapeutics and new ways of fighting the COVID pandemic. And I think we have something to be really proud of in terms of that, because we are not only working sort of nationally in that regard, but we're working with a lot of local hospitals and industry to really try to solve a global problem.
Thanks, Rochelle. I'm afraid we have come to the end of our time, so we'll have to bring the discussion to an end there. I would like to thank all of you for attending, our communications and events team for helping publish our report and organizing this event, and finally, once again, thanks to all of our panel speakers for giving up their time for this event. I do hope you have all enjoyed the event, and with that, we'll say goodbye from the University of Liverpool. So thanks again.